Apple versus Android. The blue bubble versus the green bubble. The battle every internet virgin loves to take, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if you ask me, I really don't care what phone you use, but as somebody that loves freedom and privacy, I will say that Android always used to be a lot better than having a gosh darn iPhone. You know, I always call iPhones Fisher-Price phones because you're never really able to install what you want on this, unless, of course, the big friends over at Apple approve that you do. It's always one of the reasons why looking at Android devices like these, they're typically freedom phones because you can install whatever you want. You know, you can buy these phones and you can use them exactly the way that you want to without some asshole in Silicon Valley controlling what it is you do with your devices. Not anymore, says the man in Silicon Valley. And why is that, ladies and gentlemen? Well, remember about a year ago, typically in August, I actually talked about why why Google was actually on path to destroying Android. And they're actually still full headed towards that path, by the way. So for quick context, let me just go over exactly what happened. So around last year, August of 2025, Android decided that they were going to add a new layer of security for Android phones. Now remember, this is billed as keeping you safe on the internet because apparently a lot of people install scam apps on their phone and get their entire shit stolen. And, my quick response to that is Android was never meant to be a safe product. It was meant to be a free product, okay? You do have to rub brain cells together. If you ever have people in your life that are too stupid to use cell phones or just install every app willy-nilly, may I consider getting them an Apple product instead? Because this actually does a pretty good job of locking you down. And I'm not trying to say this to be like super duper condescending. I'm just saying that if you know somebody that honestly cannot use a modern day device, they're just installing everything online and they click every pop-up ad, you might have to actually give them a lockdown device. Because if you don't do that, then shit like this happens where Google decides that now they're going to be implementing things like developer verification. So according to Google, they say that their analysis finds 50 times more malware from internet side-loaded resources than apps on Google Play. Now, Google Play is already terrible enough when it comes to malware, but I hate using the language of the enemy. So I'm going to make a concerted effort from today and moving on towards to never use the term side-loaded. Side-loaded just means you install whatever the fuck you want on your actual device, okay? I don't side-load shit onto my computer. I install it, motherfucker. Same with my phone. You know? I don't side-load it, all right? Get out of here with that double think, speak, or whatever. Anyway, so next year, and this is back in August, Android will require all apps to be registered by verified developers in order to be installed on users on certified Android devices. And that creates crucial accountability, making it much harder for malicious actors to distribute another harmful app after they take out the first one. So they say, think of it like an ID check at the airport, which confirms a traveler's identity, but it's separate from the security screening of their bags. We're going to confirm who the developer is, not reviewing the content of their apps or where it came from. Now, I hate this terminology that they use. First off, okay, let's just say the airport is the app store, right? And I'm sure at that point, that's a great analogy to make. It would be great if they were doing this just on their own app store. But they're actually doing it system-wide, meaning that if you decided to go to any other place, Google would just jump in. It would be like that meme. It's like, I consent, I don't consent. We don't need Google to be like the ultimate god amongst all of us to decide what we can and cannot do. Now, ultimately, because of the backlash that they rightfully received over here, they talked about things like other optional like flows, where I guess they would make it slightly more difficult to log in or install these applications. Nobody knows exactly what this shit looks like or how it's going to pan out or if it still needs the internet. But ultimately, anytime any of these companies try to lock down their systems, it's bad. So of course, ultimately, the developers around this decided to launch a campaign called Keep Android Open. So yeah, literally Google has not backed down from developer verification. They have not done anything. Aside from this vague mention of that advanced flow that I talked about, Google's description of the program states starting in September 2026 this year, before we're going to have lockdown Android before GTA 6, boys. Android will require all apps to be registered by verified developers in order to be installed on certified Android devices. Now remember, certified means basically most Android devices, okay? Whether you get a Google Pixel or a Samsung Galaxy or fucking any other Android device that's out there. I don't really have all the Android devices in my head. Yes, you will absolutely have issues installing applications that you want, all right? Applications that Google may not approve, right? Until such time they've shown evidence that it's possible to bypass this process without undue friction, literally nobody should trust Google. Nobody should trust anybody over here, and it's bad. So to give you an idea, what they kind of talk about over here is, again, for people who are in here, resist and refuse, okay? If you're a developer, don't sign up for the process, don't perform the identity verification, and don't accept an invitation to the Android Developer Console. And again, if you're everyone else, make it heard that you actually want to have freedom on your device. So they give a whole bunch of countries over here, for instance, Canada, where if I actually want to report this, and I will personally after this video, to the Competition Bureau and actually send out a complaint, which I think everyone in these countries listed should do. Because what Google is doing is actually the antithesis of what Android is actually about. Look, back in the day when Apple came out with the iPhone, right, it blew everyone's mind, but it wasn't the first smartphone. You know, if you look at smartphones, you had things like Windows Pocket PCs, you had Palm Pilots, you had tons of other somewhat pre-smartphone devices. iPhones were just, in my opinion, the first trendy, actually interesting device, right? With multi-touch, all of the crazy features that they had with the first iPhone, right? The first iPhone was genuinely an impressive piece of tech. But of course, it was a closed-off system. It wasn't a system that had everything available for everyone. It was something that you had to jailbreak if you wanted to install applications that, Apple didn't make. So obviously, Android came out literally 17 years ago, September 23rd, 2008, with Android 1.0, and it allowed people to have an alternative smartphone that, maybe was never as maybe it was never like iPhone exactly, but it was a very near one-to-one alternative. And there's always been the stigma that like Android's for like poor people or something, and I always thought that was a really shitty stigma to add. Like, what a douchey way to put it out there. There's a lot of Android devices that are made for low-end markets, mid-end markets, high-end markets. Hell, the Android device that I have here, a Samsung Fold, costs substantially more than Apple's most expensive product too. And this is genuinely an impressive piece of tech. But one of the big advantages that this has is openness. It's free and open. You can install whatever you want on this. If you lock these devices down, they become no better than Apple iPhones. You might as well just fucking buy an iPhone at that point, because genuinely at this point, the software is a little smoother, the battery life's a lot better, and if I can't even install what I want, I might as well just go with the person that has the more accepted ecosystem in my side of the fucking world, Hell, it's crazy to think the Google apps, every app always runs better on the iPhone as opposed to some of the applications on Android. So ultimately, what is really bad about verification, Mudo? Why is it so bad? The problem is, having yourself be verified ties you to an online service like Google, so you're paying them the money, you're verifying your identity. And the problem with verifying your identity is that you can't release applications that you genuinely would want because there might be fear of reprisal. And what do I mean by that? Imagine if you're making a privacy-focused tool like VPNs or Tor, and now you give your name up as a developer, so now you're basically doxxed to any government agency that could subpoena Google for that specific information if they want to find out who the app developer is. But imagine you're not a government, for instance, right? Let's say that you're somebody like Nintendo that literally 2 weeks ago DMCA'd every Switch emulator, apparently again. So for emulators like Eden, Citron, Kenji NX, Mellow NX, the people that produce still to this day the most up-to-date Nintendo Switch emulators, which I do use to play video games, and it's not because I don't have a Nintendo Switch, it's because emulating the stuff on my Steam Deck and my PC with 60 frames, HD graphics packs, cheats, mods are infinitely better than just using my actual Nintendo Switch. And because I can use things like SyncThing, I can actually synchronize my saves across devices and back things up without paying for like Nintendo service that I can only use on Nintendo devices. And ultimately, I love emulating, okay? It's the ultimate form of game preservation. Now, Nintendo argues that a lot of this is because these companies violate their copyright infringement because you have to bypass technical measures to do emulation. I don't really fucking care about that, to be honest with you. I like emulators. I will always side with them. But the unfortunate reality is, if you're an Android developer producing Eden and distributing this application, you will now have to dox yourself. And a lot of those guys really don't want to fucking dox themselves. Because if they do, Nintendo could subpoena that information in a lawsuit and absolutely ruin your life financially. That's just how this shit works. The other thing that really does suck about this like verification stuff too is that kind of think about it like this, right? When you buy an Android phone, you typically buy a device that you should own, right? If you want to wipe the operating system off these devices, you can plug this into a computer and completely flash the operating system into something different. Something like Graphene OS, which is genuinely the most secure mobile operating system that I personally know of. Something that if you care about your privacy, which I do, I tend to do all of my really sensitive shit out of a Google Pixel with Graphene OS installed. That's just how I do it. That's how I stay safe in a world that constantly has cyber attacks everywhere. But the other thing that really sucks about it is like, imagine the analogy if you bought a laptop from like Dell, for instance, right? And Dell was like, you know, when you buy this XPS 16 laptop for $2,300, imagine if, you know, we decide what you get to do with this device. And the reason I say that too specifically is people started to look closely at even Samsung devices. And they found out that with Samsung devices, this recovery menu, which is actually pretty standard for most Android phones, typically if you're powered off, you can hold the volume buttons, power button, and you can access this to wipe your device, to flash your device. And when people started looking at an updated version of Samsung's operating system, they realized that this whole ability to be open and free suddenly just disappeared. Now you can only reboot your system, wipe the system, and power it off. Meaning that that device you bought that was free and open has suddenly become as restrictive as an actual iPhone. And again, I bring up the laptop analogy because it's kind of similar to like Samsung, right? Like imagine if Dell told you, hey, instead of going into the boot menu or the actual BIOS, you can't install anything other than what we approve. So you can only install Windows, and that's pretty much it, okay? Your chances of installing Linux, not happening. That is a scary world. And I feel like it should be illegal, not just for computers and laptops, but also for the phones that you buy, okay? Hell, in a perfect world, if I could control it, Apple phones should be allowed for you to install Android, AOSP out of the box. You could buy an Apple phone and install Android on it if you really wanted to. But we don't live in that fucking world, okay? It's crazy shit. Now, when it comes to Android, obviously there's places like F-Droid that exists as like an alternate store that you can go to download some of your applications. So again, with Android, you don't even need to have Google's Play Store. There are other stores that you can go to for applications. And this is one of those stores. These are the guys that are keeping this Keep Android Open movement going. Because if we lose this now, if we lose this movement, that basically means Android is effectively about as gimped as an iPhone, in my opinion, of course. And at that point, genuinely speaking, why would you just not buy an iPhone? If Android wants to lock themselves as much as their actual competition over here, you might as well just go for the fucking competition. Because at least in my opinion, they produce a better quality like phone just out of the box. A safer phone, in my opinion, at least. But, you know, I don't want to just sit here and say, buy an iPhone instead. I wish we didn't live in a world that Google wanted to lock shit down. Now, frankly speaking, the situation isn't totally over yet. There actually are mobile handset manufacturers like Motorola of all phones that are coming out with a Graphene OS partnership, meaning that they're making a new era of smartphone security by working with the guys over at Graphene OS. And over here, the obvious implication is you don't even need to buy a Google Pixel anymore. There's a good chance that you could go to Motorola, purchase one of their future phones, and just install Graphene OS out of the box into this device and actually be hella safe. And I think that's a cool way to look at it, because at least in Android, much like other operating systems in the Linux sphere, they can at least produce alternative there's at least hardware manufacturers that are releasing places where you can still keep Android free and still out of Google's clutches. But again, the problem with all of this is that how far will Google go to make sure that, Android is locked down? Because again, when 90 to 95% of the market requires a certified Android device, installing all of these systems isn't always as easy as one could imagine, right? You're always removing access to things like banking apps in certain cases, not all cases, but you are removing yourself access to applications that you probably use on a daily basis. And the only way to use those applications is to submit and kneel and suddenly make the device that we're using for decades now, for almost 2 decades, if you were buying from the original 2008 date, all of that is effectively gone, right? All of that is effectively just diminished. Android was best when it was the most open, customizable system out there. But with Google's push, it's not, okay? And at that point, you might as well just buy a fucking Apple product, because that's what they want to turn it into. They want to turn it into something as gimped as an iPhone. It's crazy shit. But ladies and gentlemen, yeah, wild, wild day indeed. But ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. I am out.